This conference will now be recorded.
The words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Greetings, everyone. We are attempting session number 7, a good Bible number, that deals with a period of time that covers a total of 7 years, but primarily the last 3.5 years, the last half of that 7 years, is called the Great Tribulation. And there's actually a lot of passages in the Bible that describe the conditions of that time, such as the seals and the trumpets and the bowls of wrath in the book of Revelation, many Old Testament passages, the book of Joel, book of Ezekiel 38 and 39, just a lot of passages in Zechariah that describe the conditions of that time. But what I want to simply do is just look at the verses that speaks about that in general. We call it the uh, time of great tribulation, and as many of these kind of connect the dots sessions that I'm doing, I'm trying to restrict the string of verses that speak most directly about that subject. Because so many of these subjects, there's a lot more passages we could read that hit the edges of it or describe the conditions of it. But those verses that kind of speak of it in direct terminology is what I am trying to do with most of these. If you were to do these, you might do it a little bit different. You might add verses I did not include. You might remove verses that I included. Uh, but anyway, in general, this attempt to connect the dots is just trying to give you a framework of verses that speak about that particular subject. And then you build on that by adding a lot of other scriptures that round it out or give the fuller picture of it. So, anyway, that's just my attempt to explain what I'm trying to do with these. So, today's session, number 7, is dealing with the idea of the Great Tribulation, a period of time leading up to the return of Christ. In my way of looking at prophecy and the Bible, it's Daniel's 70th week, which is a period of 7 years, and many passages let us know that it's broken into 2 parts. Certainly, Daniel's vision of this 70 weeks, Daniel 9:24 through 27, does that, where it speaks about in the middle of the week, the covenant is broken. So just that wording itself lets us know that that last 7 years has 2 equal parts to it. But the first one I want to look at, actually the first 2, goes all the way back to Moses. And the book of Deuteronomy, which describes the end of their 40-year journey through the wilderness from Egypt to the promised land. Joshua has been said to be the replacement for Moses. Moses was not going to get to go in. And this book of Deuteronomy, it has a very prophetic nature to it, so that even way back then, as he's speaking about their future, he goes all the way to the end of the story and talks about this time of great trouble. And Deuteronomy chapter 4 is one of those chapters that has a lot of prophetic qualities to it. And it says in verse 29 of Deuteronomy 4, "But from there you will seek the Lord your God, and you will find him if you seek him with all your heart and with all your soul." In my way of looking at prophetic scriptures, uh, this has not happened yet as an entire nation. It will happen at the return of Christ and through the millennial. They will seek him with all their heart and all their soul. Certainly, there's always been an elect remnant. There's always been a faithful witness within that nation, individuals, but never as a nation. And he's describing a time when they will accomplish this. And when I say accomplish, not by their own wisdom or strength or abilities, but by the grace of God. And it says in verse 30, when you are in distress, that word distress can easily be translated as tribulation. And he says, when you are in distress and all these things come upon you, and then he tells when, in the latter days. So later in the prophet books, this kind of language at that time, uh, latter times, Jacob talked about the latter days in Genesis 49 of the future of his sons. Uh, so this is just a way to let us know he's talking about way out there in the future. And it comes to mean throughout the Bible what we now call the events leading up to the return of Christ. They didn't see it quite that way because they didn't have full understanding of the two comings of Christ, separated by a long period of time. But it was a way to make them think about some distant future event. And so he says, this distress that will come upon you in the latter days. And at that time, when you turn to the Lord your God and obey his voice. And again, a lot of later prophetic passages, uh, the end of Ezekiel 39, much of Zechariah, much of the latter chapters of Isaiah, and many others, uh, lets us know that this is describing the return of their Messiah, their regeneration as a nation. They're becoming finally a true holy nation, a kingdom of priests, the head of the nations. All these other terms the Bible uses is when this comes to pass, when you turn to the Lord your God and obey his voice. So it's kind of like the first glimpse of some type of tribulation coming upon them in the latter days. And then we turn to chapter 32, and of course, this is called the Song of Moses. He was told to teach them this song, and they were to repeat this song often. And he gave it to them in the form of a song because a song is a method making it easier to memorize and repeat. There's just something about the nature of a song that makes that much easier. And again, Deuteronomy 32 is very prophetic. I call Deuteronomy 32 the headwaters or the fountainhead of all later prophecy because it's packed full of prophetic language and taking them all the way down to the end of their history. In Deuteronomy 32 and verse 35, he said, vengeance is mine and recompense. Their foot will slip in due time for the day of their calamity. Again, this word calamity can be translated as tribulation, time of trouble, which will be developed in later passages we'll look at. And the things to come hasten upon them. And the timing of it is found in verse 36. For the Lord will judge his people and have compassion on his servants when he sees that their power is gone. Their power is gone. That will happen when they are in the wilderness, protected by God. Antichrist is trying to destroy them. God protects the remaining one third of them. So then he turns his sights on the spiritual offspring of them, those who keep the commandments of Jesus. That's the last verse of Revelation 12. And they will be saved as a people the same way we are. When we were without strength, Romans says, Christ died for us. We had to come to the end of our strength. We had to realize it's not by our own power, but by His power, by His sacrifice, by His grace, by His love and mercy, that we can be forgiven. And it's the same way with Israel at His return. They're not going to be instantly saved uh, by their own power or by their own abilities, but because they'll look on Him whom they pierced. And the saving moment is the same for them as for us when He sees, because only God knows when that moment is reached. I struggled with my own personal salvation for years. Many people have testified to the same thing. Only God knows when that person has reached the place of total humility, total lack of self sufficiency, total lack of self power, total lack of self, and cast themselves completely on the mercy and the grace and the love of God. And that's when His compassion comes in the form of forgiveness. So Deuteronomy 32:36 is a wonderful verse about their regeneration, but it comes after verse 35, the day of their calamity. And then I'll do another session on this little phrase, at hand, because that was said, many thousands of years ago. Um, and yet it says it's at hand. And all through the Old Testament prophets, that terminology of at hand or near is used, and it helps us understand how the New Testament uses it, but that's for another session. Now we go to Isaiah 26, and so we're hundreds and hundreds of years later, and Isaiah has this to say about this time of future great tribulation. Isaiah 26, verse 16. Lord, in trouble they have visited you. They poured out a prayer when your chastening was upon them. And then, as the Bible does so often, it compares the tribulation period, that last 3.5 years of Daniel's 70th week, leading to the return of Christ and their forgiveness. Uh, it often uses terminology of a woman getting ready to give birth in that period of travail. So I'll do another session on those kind of passages, and I'll probably have to read this one again. But it's at the end of that process is the birth, or is the life as a separate person. And this is doing the same thing. As a woman with child is in pain and cries out in her pangs when she draws near the time of her delivery, so have we been in your sight, O Lord. We have been with child, we have been in pain. We have, as it were, brought forth wind. We have not accomplished any deliverance in the earth, nor have the inhabitants of the world fallen. Then he moves immediately in verse 19 to a description of the resurrection, which I read in an earlier session on resurrection. Your dead shall live. So, right after this time of travail, this tribulation, this great tribulation, this trouble in verse 16, your dead shall live. That's resurrection language, or coming to life language, or regeneration language. Together with my dead body they shall rise. Awake and sing, you who dwell in dust, for your dew is like the dew of herbs, and the earth shall cast out the dead. So clearly, a tribulation leading to a resurrection. It's really important to get those two ideas together, because we'll see in just a moment in Daniel the same exact order of things. And then that last chapter of Isaiah, that famous description of them becoming a nation born in a day, which many people applied in 1948 when they literally became a nation again, but not spiritually regenerated yet. So that 1948 was a necessary precursor but there will come a spiritual birth yet in the future. So it says in Isaiah 66 and verse 7, before she was in labor, she gave birth. It's talking about the birth of Christ happening before the resurrection or regeneration of the nation. It seems to be out of order. But Christ's resurrection was out of order, wasn't it? He's the first fruits. The resurrection is an end time event, and yet he was resurrected back in time. Uh, so the order is not a natural order of things because he is supernatural, isn't he? So before she was in labor, she gave birth. Before her pain came, she delivered a male child. Who has heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Shall the earth be made to give birth in one day? We would say, well, that's talking about the resurrection itself. But then it focuses or zeroes in on the nation. Or shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Zion was in labor, there's that tribulation time, that labor time, that travail before coming to birth. As soon as Zion was in labor, she gave birth to her children. Shall I bring? See, he's the one who does it, right? Shall I bring to the time of birth and not cause delivery? So even though the great tribulation will be a time of severe trouble for Israel and for the world, he has a good ending to it, a goal in mind of causing delivery, says the Lord. Shall I, who cause delivery, shut up the womb, says your God. Then it goes on to talk about a rejoicing, Jerusalem rejoicing, and the blessings of their salvation, the blessings of the millennial kingdom, and prophecy often does that. But there's this order of things: a travail, and then a birth, and then rejoicing, and that's that ties in so easily to what women experience in the birth of their babies. Is immediately there's joy after the birth, but the time of travail leading up to it, and God captures that same idea regarding the Great Tribulation and the birth of a nation spiritually, and then a time of rejoicing. And then that famous prophecy in Jeremiah chapter 30 and verse 7. Again, we'll go back to verse 5 to get this context of labor, travail. For thus says the Lord, we have heard a voice of trembling, of fear, and not of peace. Ask now and see whether a man is ever in labor with child. So why do I see every man with his hands on his loins, like a woman in labor, and all faces turn pale? So it lets us know that this is a travail not of natural birth, because that's experienced by women, not men. But this travail that he's talking about is going to be experienced by men and women because it is of a different nature. It's a travail, what we call the Great Tribulation, leading up to their deliverance and their rejoicing. Verse 7 is the famous one. Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. So if you underline the word great and the word trouble, you put them together, there's great trouble, great tribulation. Now, a lot of people grab this verse and they say, well, that means the church must be gone, or it means that it's only for Jacob, only for Israel. But I think we all accept that. You read the book of Revelation, it's going to be a time of great trouble for the whole world. It's not limited to Israel. It doesn't mean the church has to be gone. But his focus in this passage is regarding Jacob or Israel, and it will have a special focus on them by the Antichrist because he hates anything connected to the Messiah, what belongs to the Messiah, his seed, his people Israel, and so he will attempt to destroy them. But the church will be involved, I believe, and be used by God in great ways. But alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. How will he be saved out of it? By going through it, which helps us understand some New Testament passages that people love to use about pre-trib rapture position. But here it says Jacob's going to be delivered out of it, but not from it, but through it. And I think the same thing applies to the church. Okay, now that gets us to Daniel. And this is, again, like a few previous ones, such a clear order of things, of this idea of travail and then resurrection or deliverance. 12:1, at that time, so you can circle that little phrase because it's used twice in this verse. At that time, and you have to conclude chapter 11 where it describes the Antichrist in Jerusalem after the great abomination of desolation, which will be a separate connect the dots session. So it brings the Antichrist to the end of his time, which is the end of the 7 years, the end of the last 3.5 years. And he's captured Jerusalem. He's chased people out of Jerusalem. God has them protected in the wilderness. When all that's going on, at that time, Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people. There shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation. So great tribulation. Even to that time, and at that time, your people shall be delivered. Okay. Daniel is a protege of Jeremiah. He had read Jeremiah's writing. Jeremiah had talked about, we just read it, that Jacob shall be saved through it or delivered in it. And Daniel is saying the same thing, but they are delivered by going through it, experiencing that great tribulation. Everyone who is found written in the book. And then immediately it moves into the resurrection. So any belief about a great tribulation, because many make it 70 AD that it was fulfilled when the Romans destroyed the temple in Jerusalem. But any application of these great tribulation passages that does not include a resurrection of the dead is a faulty position, because these passages tie them together. The Great Tribulation is leading directly to a resurrection. And that's what verse 2 says. Many of those who sleep in the dust shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. So this continual theme that builds on itself of a tribulation, of a deliverance, and of a rejoicing and a great blessing is over and over in these prophetic passages. Then we go to Jesus in the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24, and he tells us in this chapter, verse 15, to go to Daniel, because what Jesus is bringing up in this great sermon to his disciples about his return and the events leading up to it, he told them in John 14, I'm going to go away, but I will come again. Well, Matthew 24 expands on that and the events leading up to it. And so Jesus says in verse 15, I don't want to read all of these verses. It's talking about the abomination of desolation. But the time stamp words, when you see, the something that's going to be visible, the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel. Whoever reads, let him understand. So go back to Daniel, he's saying. So the when of the abomination in verse 21 leads to the then, another timestamp word. Then when you see the abomination of desolation, then there will be great tribulation. So Jesus is grabbing hold of the words of Moses, of the words of Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Daniel, talking about a great tribulation, putting them together in a way that we normally use it. We talk about the great tribulation. For then there will be great tribulation, such has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor shall ever be. And then in verse 29, he says, immediately after the tribulation, and like we saw in the Old Testament, he leads immediately from a time of great tribulation to a resurrection or a gathering, is that word is used a lot to explain the combination of resurrection and rapture. The rapture of the living saints, the resurrection of the dead saints together, it is called a gathering together. And that's what he uses in verse 31. And he places it immediately after the tribulation because, like the Old Testament prophets, I mean, he's the one who inspired them to write what they wrote. So he's just kind of rephrasing what he had told them to write in his own words, and he calls it a great tribulation leading to a gathering together, a resurrection and a rapture. So he's just doing the same thing that he inspired the Old Testament prophets to go in that particular order. He's using the same order. And then finally, just trying to limit it to those verses that use the direct kind of language. There'll be other sessions that kind of expand on this, of the conditions during that time. But in Revelation chapter 7 and verse 14, this will be the last verse that we look at that really puts the spotlight on this idea of a time of great tribulation. Verse 14, and I said to him, Sir, you know. Now, this is one of the elders asking about these who were arrayed in white robes. Sir, you know. So he said to me, these are the ones who come out of the great tribulation. That's the same kind of language as Jeremiah 37, isn't it? He shall be delivered from it, delivered out of it by going through it. So these arrayed in white robes are the same thing, that they come out of the great tribulation by being killed during the tribulation. Tribulation saints, we call them. But here in this use 7:14, in the Greek, the Great Tribulation has a definite article in front of both. So it might sound kind of stilted to us, but literally it would be something like the tribulation, the great one. So by way of emphasis, with double uses of the definite article, the Great Tribulation. So when we talk about the Great Tribulation, we are using exact terminology that the Bible does. And it builds on itself in the last use of it. It's called the tribulation, the great one. So it's a specific tribulation. It comes after an abomination of desolation. It leads up to the return of Christ and the resurrection and gathering together of his saints to be with him. And then a time of great blessing that we know as the millennium. So to me, it's just a real simple time order that's repeated over and over, that's easy to understand. And one of the reasons I like this approach of what I call connect the dots, a string of verses that speak about the same particular subject, is it just kind of simplifies things. It clarifies things. It puts them in an order to where you see it running through the entire Bible and building on itself and clarifying itself, to where if you approach phrases or ideas like I'm trying to do with this connect the dots, I think it kind of explains itself and draws a clear picture to where you don't have to do a lot of guesswork. It just kind of opens itself up. So that's it for today. May God bless you.